The soft spring sunlight gently embraced the quiet residential street lined with white mansions in Greenwich, Connecticut. 30 years had passed since the days when grandmother's warm cooking filled the air. Let me confirm once more. The reservation deposit is $800,000, correct? Elizabeth Williams gave a small nod at the real estate agent's words. With a dignified bearing that belied her 32 years, her refined profile visible beneath her chef's coat exuded the confidence gained from 10 years of training. Yes. $200,000 is my own funds, and the bank has approved the remaining loan. Elizabeth had entered a prestigious culinary school at 18 and subsequently built her experience at the 3 Michelin-starred restaurant, Le Bernardin, in New York. She felt her heart racing at the thought that the time had finally come to transform her achievements into her own restaurant. Fascinated by her grandmother's cooking since childhood, she had held on to the dream of reviving those flavors in the modern era. After 10 years of working through holidays and overtime, she had finally made it this far. I believe I can show you a wonderful property. On Greenwich Avenue. At that moment, her phone rang. Excuse me, it's my mother. Elizabeth answered the phone. Elizabeth. Vanessa got engaged. To Michael Harrington III. Her mother Patricia's excited voice rang out. Patricia always worried about the neighborhood's opinion with her perfect hair, makeup, and flashy clothes. As a central figure in the local garden club, she constantly strived to join the upper class. Harrington Constructions. Yes. That major construction company. We're having a celebration tonight, and you absolutely must come. We've rented out the Belle Haven Club. Elizabeth let out a small sigh. Her sister Vanessa, with her model-like looks and latest branded clothes, had grown up receiving their parents' full adoration. While working at a luxury jewelry store, she was desperate to obtain a ticket into high society. Since childhood, their parents had doted on Vanessa while dismissing Elizabeth's dream with comments like working in some shop. But I have a property viewing today. You can open a shop anytime. This is an important family day. Or are you saying you can't celebrate Vanessa's happiness? As always, her mother's words concealed contempt for being just a chef. Elizabeth lowered her eyes. The recipe notebook inherited from her grandmother felt heavy in her bag. That night, a party was underway at the Williams mansion. Under the chandelier, invited guests were engaged in elegant conversation. Think of appearances, was her father Robert's constant refrain. As the owner of a local mid-sized construction company, he always worried about public opinion, wearing expensive suits over his sturdy frame. Though his company was never large, it had maintained its reputation in town. Oh, Elizabeth. Still in that chef's uniform? You should have dressed up more. Don't come to the wedding at the Lounsbury house looking like that. Vanessa's voice carried refined disdain. Her engagement ring gleamed prominently. Besides her, the Harrington family members smiled gracefully. Elizabeth smiled silently. The $200,000 she had saved over 10 years. Putting it in a joint account with her parents stemmed from her hospitalization after a car accident at 18. At the time, it seemed prudent just in case, though she somewhat regretted it now. Still, she had trusted her family and hadn't felt the need to change it. Outside the window, the spring night wind blew quietly, as if presaging what was to come. In her apartment in the New York suburbs, Elizabeth switched on the lights while dragging her tired feet. Her chef's coat collar bore traces of sweat from long hours of preparation. Outside the window, rain had begun falling quietly. Finally done for today. The fatigue from 12 hours of standing work washed over her. Still, she turned on her computer. It was her daily habit. Checking her savings balance and counting down to the opening was her small happiness. She had a meeting scheduled with the interior contractor tomorrow. The feeling that her dream was finally approaching reality was soothing her tired body. The screen lit up brightly. The Wells Fargo online banking screen. She logged in to check her account balance. What? Elizabeth's eyes widened. Balance $0. Some mistake. With trembling fingers, she opened the transaction history. There were cold numbers lined up. A transaction from just 1 hour ago. Transfer to Vanessa Williams, $200,000. Her eyes remained fixed on the seemingly unreal fact. Her hand reached for her phone. She tried her mother's number, but it wouldn't connect. Her father's number was the same. Her heart began racing. Sweat trickled down her back. Her grandmother's photograph hanging on the kitchen wall seemed to smile sadly. Then, a message arrived from Vanessa. Come to the family home right now. She drove through the rain. The sound of wipers clearing raindrops marked an ominous rhythm. 30 minutes later, she arrived at the Williams mansion. An unfamiliar Bentley was parked at the entrance. Surely the Harrington family's car. The mansion was wrapped in an unusual silence. Under the expensive chandelier, only the sound of the clock striking 9 p.m. echoed. There were 4 shadows in the living room. Vanessa, sitting gracefully on the sofa. Dressed in what appeared to be a new Hermes dress, her large diamond engagement ring sparkled. Father Robert, back straight. Unusually, he was still in his suit even at home tonight. Mother Patricia, wrapped in an expensive dress. Her perfect hair and makeup looked rather unnatural. And Elizabeth, standing still in her chef's coat. The smell of sweat and kitchen created an out-of-place atmosphere in the luxurious reception room. What happened to all my savings? Elizabeth's voice was surprisingly calm. We used it for Vanessa's wedding. Her father's voice carried an authoritative ring. The expression of someone who had just closed a big deal. Since we're also account holders, there's no legal problem. A wedding costs at least $500,000. Her mother laughed through her nose. In her hands was a brochure for a luxury wedding venue. A family event like Vanessa's wedding takes priority. Your restaurant can wait. Elizabeth couldn't believe her ears. 10 years of effort. Daily overtime. Working through holidays. Countless trials to perfectly recreate her grandmother's recipes. Everything had vanished in an instant. But that was my. Vanessa let out a loud laugh. Her voice carried the arrogance that had been ingrained since childhood. Nobody would come to such a cheap restaurant anyway. Her parents smiled. At that expression, Elizabeth froze. Such cold eyes, as if looking at strangers. It seemed impossible they were blood-related family. The wedding will be at the Lounsbury house. It'll be the talk of the town. Her mother's eyes shone, filled with ecstasy as if witnessing a long-held dream come true. The Harrington family thinks it's wonderful too. With this marriage, we'll finally be part of real high society. Nobody wants to eat your cooking. This money is better spent on my wedding. Vanessa's voice rang out. Her parents' laughter overlapped. Those voices squeezed Elizabeth's heart like demonic whispers. Elizabeth slowly stood up. An unprecedented calmness filled her heart. The trembling of her body mysteriously subsided. That's right, your restaurant would just fail anyway. Vanessa's loud laughter echoed through the mansion. Elizabeth said nothing. Tightly gripping the recipe notebook inherited from her grandmother, she silently headed for the entrance. Behind her, her family's laughter still echoed. The sound of a champagne cork popping, announcing the start of a festive celebration. She started the car. The lights of the mansion in her rearview mirror grew smaller and smaller. In the car, tears finally began to flow. Her hands gripping the steering wheel trembled. I'll show them. Absolutely. In the spring night sky, the full moon shone coldly. Its light seemed to quietly watch over Elizabeth's new resolve. Under the midsummer sun beating down on Le Bernardine's kitchen, Elizabeth continued silently preparing sauces. 3 months had passed since that night. Her expression now held a sharp light that hadn't been there before. Elizabeth, do you have a moment? The voice came from executive chef Mark Anderson. Though in his mid-60s, his posture was straight as bamboo, and his eyes were sharper than those of the young chefs. The dignity of a man who had reigned over a 3-star kitchen for over 30 years tightened the air. Yes, chef. 2 hours until service began. Elizabeth stopped her work and followed Mark. Passing through the kitchen's bustle, they headed to the restaurant's quietest place, the wine cellar. Stepping into the temperature-controlled space, the mature, rich aroma tickled their nostrils. You've changed recently. Mark looked straight at Elizabeth. The man who had discovered her at 18 10 years ago and raised her into a first-class chef understood her like a daughter. I'm sorry. If it's affecting my work. No, quite the opposite. Mark continued. Your cooking has gained more depth. It has a taste that only comes from someone who has overcome hardship. I know about what happened that night. Elizabeth's eyes wavered. Mark slowly picked up a wine bottle and continued. 1947 Chateau Mouton Rothschild. Born in the post-war chaos, yet it captivated the world with its extraordinary quality. Sometimes, the harshest environments produce the finest art. While quietly weaving his words, Mark poured the wine into a decanter. The deep ruby liquid reflected soft light. I have several acquaintances who are investors. They will surely be captivated by your cooking. Would you like to hold a tasting? At those words, Elizabeth's heart raced. It was as if a ray of light had broken through at the end of a long tunnel. Over the next 2 weeks, Elizabeth's life transformed. During the day, she stood in the kitchen as usual, and at night, she immersed herself in developing test dishes in her home kitchen. She modernized recipes inherited from her grandmother, pouring her soul into each dish. Countless sleepless nights passed. However, there was no time to feel fatigue. Her heart was filled with a kind of exhilaration. Even her anger towards her family had been sublimated into a driving force for creation. Then, the fateful day arrived. On the top floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, 5 investors gathered in a venue overlooking New York's skyline. All were owners of Michelin-starred restaurants and the industry's finest connoisseurs. Elizabeth prepared a 7-course meal. The appetizer was her grandmother's traditional clam chowder, reconstructed with a modern interpretation. Topped with caviar and edible flowers, a creamy soup flowed out when the spoon entered. The investors' eyes sparkled at the contrast between the elegant appearance and nostalgic taste. The main dish was beef braised for 48 hours at low temperature. A memorable dish her grandmother used to make for Sunday dinners, elevated with the latest cooking techniques. The meat had a silk-like texture when eaten, with an unexpected accent of wasabi. This is James Morrison, who had led the restaurant industry for many years, spoke up. His expression showed emotion unlike anything seen before. "I've been in this industry for over 40 years. But I've never been moved by cooking like this before." By the time all dishes including dessert were finished, the sky had turned to dusk. "Elizabeth." Morrison stood up and quietly announced, "We want to invest in your restaurant. The amount is $500,000. However, there's one condition." Elizabeth held her breath. "Never compromise your passion and talent. And please write a new page in New York's culinary history." Outside the window, Manhattan's street lights began to illuminate all at once, as if celebrating the beginning of Elizabeth's new life. The contract was immediately established. A prime location in Greenwich Village was secured through Morrison's connections. Interior design, staff recruitment, menu development, everything proceeded surprisingly smoothly. 2 weeks before opening, Elizabeth stood in her new restaurant's kitchen. The brand-new cooking equipment reflected light gently. The cold touch of the stainless steel counter felt pleasant under her hands. "Congratulations, Elizabeth." Mark visited and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, Chef. I couldn't have made it this far without you." Mark shook his head. "This is all your own strength. And..." He paused slightly, as if choosing his words. "Sometimes, those closest to us give us our greatest trials. But only those who overcome them gain true strength. You have proven that." Elizabeth nodded silently. Outside the window, the twilight sky burned brightly. Then came opening day. Reservations were booked 3 months ahead just through social media word of mouth. Even the New York Times food critic had already made a reservation. 30 minutes before opening, Elizabeth put on her new uniform. Her custom-made chef's coat stood dignified and beautiful, as if representing her new pride. "Everyone, listen up." Elizabeth spoke quietly but powerfully to the gathered staff. "From today, we begin creating new history. Let's put our souls into every dish." Expectation and tension filled the kitchen. And at the moment of welcoming their first guest, Elizabeth's eyes held a light of strong will. At the Lounsbury House standing in Greenwich's upscale residential area, Vanessa was busy with her wedding dress fitting. The pure white silk organza dress was specially ordered from Paris. Delicate embroidery by artisans adorned the hem's lace. "Miss, could you turn to the right a bit?" At the Paris-invited dress designer's voice, Vanessa smiled with satisfaction. Around her, upper-class friends gathered, raising voices of admiration at her appearance. It was truly the most brilliant moment of her life. At that moment, one friend picked up her new iPhone and excitedly exclaimed, "Look at this! It's a New York Times review." What? A new culinary sanctuary born in Greenwich Village, Elizabeth Williams' restaurant, a memoir, has captured the hearts of gourmets just 2 weeks after opening. The air froze. The article continued. Chef Elizabeth has reinterpreted recipes inherited from her grandmother with astonishing talent, bringing a fresh wind to the culinary world. Reservations are already booked 6 months ahead, and rumors suggest Michelin inspectors have secretly visited. Elizabeth Williams? One friend timidly asked. Your sister? The blood drained from Vanessa's face. That night, at a dinner party at the Belle Haven Club, the most influential social venue in Connecticut, rumors spread rapidly. Did you hear? The Harrington fiancé's sister is getting amazing reviews. Sipping wine, the upper society members whispered about this scandalous truth. Her savings were used for the wedding expenses. My, how dreadful. The rumor had reached the ears of Victoria, Michael Harrington III's mother. In the mansion's study, Victoria faced Robert Harrington II. A heavy atmosphere hung in the room. Is this story true? Victoria's voice was cold as ice. Answer me. Patricia, who had been invited, responded. That's our family matter. Family matter? Victoria stood up. Her bearing carried the dignity of the Harrington family's 200-year history. The Harrington family is one of the most important dynasties in this country's construction industry. Our reputation is irreplaceable. And to tarnish that reputation. Her voice trailed off. But its meaning was clear. Meanwhile, at Williams Construction, the impact had already begun to show. Robert, we'll have to pass on this project after all. A major developer's executive announced politely but firmly. New project contract cancellations were occurring one after another. But our track record, your company's credibility is being questioned. At those words, Robert's spine froze. He could almost hear the sound of the credit he had built over 30 years crumbling. 1 week later, an email arrived from the Lounsbury House manager. We deeply regret to inform you that regarding your wedding venue reservation, we would like to reconsider. Vanessa screamed the moment she read those lines. An expensive vase fell to the floor and shattered. This can't be true. It can't be. The pure white dress ordered from Paris still lay wrapped in vinyl, gleaming coldly in the corner of the room. The next day, an official notice arrived from the Harrington family's lawyer. Regarding the dissolution of engagement between Michael Harrington III and Ms. Vanessa Williams. Behind the objective text, a cold determination seeped through. Mother Patricia fainted upon reading the notice, collapsing onto the expensive sofa. Father Robert stared vacantly out the window. The company's stock price had plummeted. Contract cancellations from business partners were pouring in, and resignation letters from employees were piling up. Why? Vanessa broke down crying. Is it our fault? It's all Elizabeth's fault. Everything is her fault. As the sound of heavy rain pounding on the windows echoed, the Williams family's downfall proceeded quietly but surely. The family made one last attempt at hope by visiting Elizabeth's restaurant. "We sincerely apologize. We are fully booked for the next 6 months." The hostess's dignified voice carried none of their former arrogance. At that moment, a black Rolls-Royce stopped in front of the restaurant. Through the window, Elizabeth could be seen. Her new chef's coat shone like a symbol of victory. She didn't spare even a glance at her family standing on the street. The luxury car quietly drove away, leaving behind only the stunned figures of her family. Spring 2029. New York's morning began with its usual bustle. Restaurant Memoir stood quietly in a corner of Greenwich Village. Even after earning 2 Michelin stars, reservations remained booked a year in advance. A line had already started forming in front of the store early in the morning, the waitlist queue. In the kitchen, Elizabeth was working on developing new menus. Now 39, her expression carried fulfillment and composure. No trace of the pain from 5 years ago remained. "Chef, the food and wine interviewer has arrived," a young sous chef announced. This month's feature was America's Leading Female Chefs. Elizabeth was to be prominently featured as the main subject. "Thank you. I'll be there in 10 minutes." Elizabeth carefully finished her work while glancing outside the window. The spring sunlight gently illuminated new buds on the street trees. Meanwhile, in the suburbs of Connecticut, in an old apartment about 30 minutes by car from the former upscale residential area. "Patricia, you'll be late." Father Robert's voice echoed in the small room. Since losing his company at 62, he had been working as a security guard at a local shopping mall. His expensive suits had been replaced by work uniforms, and his once dignified expression was covered with fatigue. "Just a moment." Mother Patricia worked part-time at a department store cosmetics counter. Her once perfect hair and makeup were now done by herself, and her former elegance had faded. "Reading that article again?" Robert glanced at his wife's tablet. The screen displayed a feature article about a memoir. "Elizabeth has really become something remarkable." Patricia's voice carried a complex resonance mixing regret and pride. At that time, Vanessa was expressionlessly processing customers' purchases at a supermarket register. After quitting the luxury jewelry store, she had ended up working here. Her branded uniform had been replaced by a supermarket apron. "Oh my, isn't that Vanessa?" The voice came from a former social acquaintance. Wrapped in luxury brands with perfect makeup, she reminded Vanessa of her former self. "I finally got a reservation at a memoir. I waited a year. It is your sister's restaurant, after all." Vanessa continued scanning items in silence. That night, a letter arrived at Elizabeth's office. Written in her mother's elegant handwriting, the envelope read, "To my beloved daughter." Outside the window, Manhattan's night view sparkled. Elizabeth slowly opened the letter. "To my beloved daughter. It has been so long since we've seen you. Every day, when I see your success in newspapers and media, this mother's heart fills with complex emotions. Back then, we committed an unforgivable mistake. We trampled on your dream, your effort. There are no excuses. I apologize from the bottom of my heart. Only now do I truly understand your talent. How foolish I was to look down on my daughter working in a restaurant. Now, you are a world-renowned chef. And more than anything, a proud woman who lives true to her beliefs without compromise. I won't ask for forgiveness. I just wanted to convey this. Mother is proud of you. With love, Mother. Elizabeth quietly closed the letter and put it through the shredder. The finely shredded paper pieces fell like snow. A guest has arrived, the hostess announced. Elizabeth stood up and adjusted the collar of her new chef's coat. Tonight's guests are the New York State Governor and party. She smiled. My family is this restaurant and our guests. That's enough for me now. The spring night wind gently tapped on the window, as if announcing the arrival of a new season.